It's wonderful to be back with you. It's always sort of nice to have the Baptist preacher back at the Episcopal Church. So thank you for putting up with my Baptist ways. It's good to be here. So back when, some of you may remember, Noah's Bagels used to be downtown on Madison Street. Almost every morning on the way to work, I'd take my New York Times and stop into Noah's to read the day's news while I ate my sesame bagel and drank my Diet Coke. And you have to know, in the South, Coke is for breakfast. This would not be all that odd in where I come from. Melissa and Duncan were behind the corner. And usually Deborah was already there, reading her book and marking it up with colored pencils. Crusty old Frank came in soon, saying hello to everyone and talking about his beloved Dallas Cowboys. Glenn came in before his golf game. He'd had open heart surgery a few months ago, but he was back in the swing of things now. We all smiled and said hello. They called me professor, and Glenn teased me about my left-wing reading material. When I left, I gave Frank my newspaper, and he told me to have a good day. I found this morning ritual very comforting. It reminded me of Norm's entrance into Cheers, when everybody in the bar turned and greeted him. Okay, enough of you remember Cheers. Norm! What's comforting, of course, is the sense of belonging, the sense of being a part of this little community of morning bagel eaters. Now, it's not that building community over food is in any way a new idea. Certainly, we know one of the primary rituals of Christian worship recognizes that community comes around the meals that we share together. And literature is replete with images of common meals as a symbol of community, and the kitchen or cafe as a gathering place for people who share a journey. Iggy and Ruth built a little community of black and white, rich and poor, by serving fried green tomatoes at the Whistle Stop Cafe. The women of Brewster Place came together for a block party with barbecue ribs, chicken sandwiches, and angel food cake. Food and community. We need both. Both sustain us. I see the church as a diner. God's diner. Have you ever been driving along the freeway late at night after a long day's journey on the road and you're tired and hungry and there's not a Taco Bell in sight? And then just up the freeway ahead you see a lighted sign that says home-cooked food, open 24 hours, next exit. And you pull off into the parking lot of this greasy spoon where a waitress named Madge serves you up the best tasting plate of fried chicken and mashed potatoes you've ever had. In the background, a jukebox is playing the oldies, and of course they weren't oldies the first time you heard them, but still the music reaches out and it pulls you in, and the taste and smells and sounds connect you to the other travelers in the booths and at the counter, eating fried chicken and asking Madge for another cup of coffee for the journey home. Quaker folk singer Carrie Newcomer has a song called Betty's Diner, and the chorus goes, "Here we are, all in one place, the wants and wounds of the human race. Despair and hope sit face to face when you come in from the cold. Let her fill your cup with something kind, eggs and toast like bread and wine. She's heard it all, so she don't mind." I think that's a pretty good description of what the church ought to be. I imagine all of us seated around the tables in God's diner. So there's Charlotte Hedrick with a cup of coffee, regaling people in the nearby booth with stories of Knoxville, Tennessee. And there's Michelle Justice having a piece of apple pie while she sends out an email because God's Diner got internet just a few years ago. There's Nancy at the jukebox sipping a Coke and putting quarters in to play a classic British invasion tune just for Simon. Laura and a group of women are laughing about old times over herbal tea. Melissa's eating the blue plate special at the counter while Ruth is showing family pictures to everyone in the room. Cammie is helping the kids color the back of the menus. And Abby's getting everybody refills while Simon just goes from table to table making everyone feel welcome. And we're all there, all eating and laughing and telling our stories. And of course, occasionally someone cries because our pain and loss and sickness are also with us, and everyone embraces us in our sorrow. And the Spirit of God moves in and around us, comforting us, strengthening us, empowering us, and welcoming us. Psychologist Alfred Adler developed a portion of his psychological theory on the notion, and I'm going to try it in German, so just forgive me, German speakers, Gemeinschaftsgefühl. Loosely translated, it's the feeling of community, the sense of belonging. Some of Adler's interpreters have explained it this way. If people have developed the feeling of community at the affective level, they are likely to feel a deep belonging to the human race, and as a result are able to empathize with their fellow humans. They can feel very much at home on the earth, accepting both the comforts and discomforts of life. At the cognitive level, they can acknowledge the necessary interdependence with others, recognizing that the welfare of any one individual ultimately depends on the welfare of all. At the behavioral level, these thoughts and feelings can then be translated into actions aimed at self-development as well as cooperative and helpful movement directed toward others. Thus, at its heart, the concept of feeling of community encompasses individuals' full development of their capacities, a process that is both personally fulfilling and results in people who have something worthwhile to contribute to one another. At the same time, the concept denotes a recognition and acceptance of the interconnectedness of all people. So this feeling of community means we are both at home with those around us and we are welcoming of others into our community. It means that we give to and receive from one another. And it recognizes the deep and meaningful ways in which we are all interconnected, even across our differences. Surely God's diner is a place of Gemeinschaftsgefühl. Here of all places, we should have a feeling of community. Here of all places, we should know that God's welcome extends to everyone, and that we should practice that welcome in our embrace of others. You see, no one's turned away from God's diner. There's no sign hanging on the door that says no shoes, no shirt, no service. No sign that says whites only, or English only spoken here. My dear friend Paula was teaching at a Southern Baptist college in California when the president stopped by her office to chastise her for not condemning homosexuality in her social work classes. Never one to shirk from confrontation when she feels it necessary, Paula responded, "I am not the maitre d' at God's table. I don't get to decide who gets seated and who doesn't." Like Paula, I believe that everyone is welcome at God's table. Women and men and non-binary people, black, brown, and white, straight, gay, lesbian, bisexual, and queer, Christian, Jew, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, agnostic, atheist, Democrat, Republican, independent, green, rich, middle class, working class, poor, young, old, differently abled, American, Mexican, Canadian, French, Iraqi, Korean. I am not the maitre d'. And for that matter, neither is Franklin Graham, or Robert Jeffress, or Jerry Falwell Jr., or James Dobson, or Paula White. No one of us has the right to exclude anyone else from God's table, no matter how much we don't like them. Because God's diner is always open and always has plenty of seating. There's a wonderful old hymn I learned to sing as a child in my Southern Baptist church that had not yet learned fully to practice its words. It's called "There's a Wideness in God's Mercy." And the verses go like this. There's a wideness in God's mercy like the wideness of the sea. There's a kindness in God's justice, which is more than liberty. For the love of God is broader than the measure of our mind, and the heart of the eternal is most wonderfully kind. But we make God's love too narrow by false limits of our own, and we magnify God's strictness with a zeal God will not own. In the book of Acts, we read a story about Peter, who goes up to a rooftop to take a nap. Now, the primary theme of the book of Acts is the falling of barriers before the gospel. Again and again in this book, we see the early Christians trying to set up very narrow parameters for who can be included in this new community of the church. And again we see God's Spirit taking down the barriers that the church sets up. So Peter's up on the roof, and he falls asleep, and he has a dream. And in his dream, a large sheet is lowered containing all sorts of animals forbidden by Jewish law to be eaten. Peter basically said, that the voice comes and tells Peter to get up and take food from the sheet and eat it. And Peter basically says, no way. I've never eaten anything that's unclean, and I'm not starting now. So this happens 3 times, and then finally the sheet is taken away. And a voice says to Peter, don't you call unclean what God has called clean. About that time, Peter wakes up to find out he's been summoned to the house of a Gentile to preach the gospel. And suddenly it clicks for Peter. Under his old prejudices, he is forbidden to enter the house of a Gentile. But now he realizes it's not his business to determine who's clean or unclean. His business, rather, is to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk only with God. I first ran across this story in a Barbara Kingsolver novel. It comes from the indigenous people of South America. So if you go to visit hell, they say, you'll see a great room with a huge kitchen. And there's a pot of delicious stew on the table with the most delicate aroma that you can imagine. And all around the table, people sit, but they're all dying of starvation. They're gibbering and jabbering and carrying on because they can't get a bite of this wonderful stew that God has made for them. Why, you ask? They're starving because they only have spoons with very long handles, at least 6 feet long. And so with these ridiculous, terrible spoons, they can dip into the pot, but they can't put the food in their mouth. And so they're hungry, and they swear, and they curse. But now you go to visit heaven. And in heaven you find the same room, the same kitchen, the same table, the same pot of stew, the same spoons, just as long. But everybody's fat and happy. Why, you ask? Because with their spoons they reach into the pot and then they feed one another. In God's diner, everybody gets fed. We're all fat and happy because we're part of God's beloved community. Our job's not to serve as bouncers for people who get too rowdy, or wear the wrong clothes, or love the wrong people, or say the wrong prayers. Our job is to go out into the highways and hedges and compel them to come in. Because a banquet is set before us. The desires of our heart, the psalmist tells us, and it's plentiful. There's no need to hoard or push anyone aside. In God's diner, there's always more than enough. For the bounty of God is everywhere evident, and we're all welcome. Now, lest I sound naive, I acknowledge that not everything is perfect in God's diner. After all, we are all there. And that means we bring with us our idiosyncrasies and our wounds and our sorrows and the meanness we have just not worked out yet. So to be honest, there are some people in God's diner I just don't want to share a booth with. But they still belong in God's diner. And if we as human beings are going to survive and thrive and not destroy this planet, then we've got to find a way to be together and share a cup of coffee and listen with attention to our common human struggles. After all, as the gospel reading today points out, Jesus told us, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. If anyone strikes you on the cheek, offer the other also. And from anyone who takes away your coat, do not withhold your shirt. Give to everyone who begs from you. And if anyone takes away your goods, don't ask for them again. Do to others as you would have them do to you. We all belong in God's diner. This is our place of belonging, our place of welcome and community. Here is where we can bring our full selves, our wants and wounds, as Carrie Newcomer put it, where despair and hope can sit face to face. Because, as we know, sometimes you want to go where everybody knows your name, and they're always glad you came. You want to be where you can see our troubles are all the same. You want to be where everybody knows your name. You want to go where people know people are all the same. You want to go where everybody knows your name. This desire to belong is so basic to our humanity, and yet, for some reason, we find it so hard to extend that same belonging to everyone else. We find it hard to recognize our common humanity far outweighs our differences. Now, granted, humanity is a mess. I mean, undoubtedly there are spills in God's diner, and sometimes the guests get into food fights, and We don't always clean up after ourselves or say please and thank you, and some people complain about what's on the menu, and some people are really bad tippers, but we're all there. And God wipes the counter and shakes her head and puts on another pot of coffee, and we're all still welcome. And that's the good news, that we're welcome, in the words of the old hymn, just as we are. My guess is that today a lot of us brought in a heavy load. We carry the weight of our sorrows, our aches and pains, our fears and hopes. But God's diner is a place where we can all take a load off. Here, God's ragtag people can come for sustenance and comfort. Here, we can find belonging. We can tell our stories and find a feeling of community, a home away from home. God opens the door wide and welcomes each of us with a sit down, honey, and let me pour you a fresh cup of coffee. There's a skillet of cornbread coming out of the oven, and I got a bowl of banana pudding with your name on it. There's a group over there that turns and calls out your name and waves you over. In the background, Stevie Wonder singing What a Wonderful World. You slip off your coat, and whatever your burdens, you feel them lighten, if only for a little while. God gives you a wink and a smile, and you find a little hope somewhere within yourself. It's starting to get dark outside, so God turns on the neon sign, and against the night it shines out. Everyone welcome, always open. Amen.